Okay, we are, if you've been following along with us, we've gone through our Sermon on the Mount. We've looked at two uh, chapters. We were in chapter 5 a few weeks ago and chapter 6 last week, looking at the actual teachings of Jesus and how can we as a group of people live those teachings out in 2026 in Bartlesville, Oklahoma. And so this is our last one. We're going to be in chapter 7. And as you might be aware, this has taken us to places that we did not expect to go. And the teachings of Jesus are not necessarily easy to follow. They can be quite challenging. And that's okay, because as what we like to tell our children is you can do hard things. You can do hard things. And I don't know where it was. I was visiting with someone or spending time with someone. They had on their water bottle and it said, "You can do hard things." And I was like, yes, you can. You can do hard things. And I was very impressed that was still there. So we're going to dive into the narrow gate today. The narrow gate. In Matthew chapter 7, Jesus spends some time on the narrow gate, and he's going to, and it's not quite working up here, David, but if you could go advance one. So in Matthew chapter 7, he talks about two gates. And this is not an unfamiliar idea, not just in Judaism and Christianity, but across the world. There's this overarching idea across cultures and across religions that there's two paths that one person can go on. There's a path that leads to death and a path that leads to life. But Jesus gives us a little bit more detail when he talks about these two gates or these two paths. Can you go to the next slide, please? So he says in Matthew chapter 7, he says, "Enter through the," what kind of gate? The narrow gate, for the gate is wide and the road is broad that leads to destruction, and there are many who go through it. Now, Jesus is not trying to say that it's difficult to enter into eternal life. That's not his point that he's trying to communicate. What is he trying to say? That many go through the wide gate, many go through the broad road. Now, a big question is, why is it broad? Why is it wide? Because has anyone gone hiking before? Maybe you're hiking up a mountain or through the forest and you come to a fork in the road and you get to choose, do I go uphill or do I go on the flat road? Now, if you're in a large group of people, what percentage of people are going to choose the flat road over the road that goes uphill? Yeah, majority are going to pick the flat one, right? What happens on a path when many people go on that path over a number of years, over the course of time? It gets more worn, sometimes it gets wider, it gets easier to go on that path. And Jesus' point is the reason that many are going down a road of destruction is it's easier, it's more convenient to go down that road, and he's going to connect something in a few verses later that begin to tie in, that many people are teaching to go down that road as well. And by comparison, we have the narrow gate that is narrow and closed. Can you just go to the next slide, please? So he continues in verse 14. He says, "The narrow gate, and how narrow is the gate, and difficult the road that leads to life, and few that find it." Next slide, please. All right, so a number of years ago, Ashley, myself, and my friend Kyle went on a backpacking trip. And this was back in the day when we could go backpacking. We were still, we weren't married at that point. We were dating back then. And we decided to go to the Lost Coast Trail. The Lost Coast Trail in Northern California. And it's this long trail that goes along the coast. But we didn't start on the coast. We decided to start in one of the state parks. And this was a unique experience because the road stopped being paved. And actually, I don't know if you remember this, but as we were driving down this dirt road, there were parts of the road that were not even. They had big dips only on one side. And so it felt like you were going four-wheeling on a driving road, and we were not in a four-wheeling car. We were in an Accord at that time, right? A Honda Accord, and we're going four-wheeling on this road. But eventually we get to our spot, we get our backpacks out, and we go down a road we start hiking in the forest that looks just like this. And it was a beautiful, beautiful place, and we're having a good time. Usually at the beginning of your hike, you're having a good time, and slowly that had begun to change. Well, can you go to the next slide, please? As we were hiking along, we saw beautiful creeks. That's how we say it in California. And we saw all these beautiful little waterfalls and ferns and different things. Well, about halfway through, we had walked about 6 miles, and we decided to set up camp there. And while we had set up camp, there's this thing that you have to do in some states, which is you have to store your food. And we were not staying at campsites. We were staying right off of the side of the road, because that's what you do when you want to go on an adventure. You just find a place and pitch your tent, and that's what we did. And in California, when you go backpacking, oftentimes you need to store your food up in a tree. And so we got all our food together. We got the rope together, and we found this beautiful big tree with a big branch, and we were going to put all our food up there. When we got to the tree, we saw something. There were claw marks up the tree and onto the branch. And we realized people have done this before, and possibly the bear got the food before. And so we're trying to figure out, what are we going to do with our food? We don't want to put it in our tent, because the bear will come into the tent. And that's a no-no, bear. You don't come into my tent. And so we were looking around, and if you've ever gone backpacking in the forest, usually you don't find porta potties. But for some reason, there was a porta potty there, and we decided that is a good place to hide our food, because the porta potty has a wonderful smell to mask the aroma of our food. And so with our food all packaged up, we got it, and we walked over to the porta potty, and we put our food in the corner of the porta potty. And guess what happened that night? No bear got our food. Not a single one. And that next morning, we didn't even think twice about it. We just opened up our food and started eating. We had a good breakfast that morning. And nothing in that porta potty was able to get our food. It was wonderful. So we kept on going, and we kept on walking, and that first day was about 6 miles in. And the second day, I think we did about 8 miles. I don't know if you want to correct me on that later. I think it was much farther. Let's say it was 14, right? Let's say it was 14. We hiked a long way, and as we were hiking, we got to the next slide, and we found what we were looking for, which was the next slide here, the beach. We finally got to the lost trail that led us to the coast. And we saw some amazing things there, some strange things as well. There was a group of, I think they were Jews that were having a party that night. That was kind of interesting. And then there was, we went to sleep in there. We were so tired when we got there. We were just exhausted. I can remember trying to train my brain to remember how to breathe, and it's how tired we were. We were just falling over onto the sand, onto the beach. So happy that we finally got to the end of that portion of the trail. And we went to bed that night, and when we woke up, Kyle and I, we shared a tent, and he nudged me, and he said, "Make sure you're quiet." And I said, "Why?" And he unzipped the tent, and there were about 100 elk grazing out on the grass, just right in front of our faces. And we got up, and then we zipped it back up, and we stayed in that tent until the elk had gone away. But there's a point I want to make about the story, and that is, as my family is laughing at me for some reason, is that if you want to get to something beautiful, you often have to go a long way. The best views are not at the easiest hikes. It's when you can get to the top. The best experiences come from hard journeys. When we do the things that everyone else does, we don't experience the things that we could experience if we were to do the things that no one does. And Jesus, in his Sermon on the Mount, talks about 2 gates and 2 paths, that you can go the route that everyone else is taking, and you're going to experience the results that everyone else is experiencing. This is the thing that we often want to do, right? We want to be normal. We want to be normal. But greatness doesn't come from being normal. Being extraordinary is in the name. You're extraordinary. You're well and above and beyond the expectations. And God is calling his people to be extraordinary, not to be normal or regular. And God's people do things differently. If you were at our communion last night, we talked about how the way the world operates is one way. And Jesus tells his disciples that we don't work that way. It shall not be so among you. Us in the kingdom of God, we operate differently. We do things differently. And in Matthew 7, Jesus is going to continue to emphasize this once again. Now he moves from the 2 gates, next slide please, into the false teachers. So here is just a summary right here. The narrow path isn't about being perfect, it's about staying connected to Jesus. Can you go to the next slide, please? Yeah, he moves into the false prophets. Now, it might seem that these things are disconnected, but these are very closely related. The 2 gates, the wide gate and the narrow gate, are closely connected to false prophets. And if there's a false prophet, there might also be a what? A true prophet, right? And so, or a false teacher and a true teacher. And so Jesus is now going to emphasize, how do we determine if the person I am following is false or true? Now, there's all kinds of ideas of people, especially in the religious world, who is a false teacher, who is a true teacher, and how do we supposed to determine that? Some people think it's if someone is a liberal, they're a false teacher. If someone's a conservative, they're a false teacher. But the beautiful thing about Jesus is he does not say, stay away from the Pharisees. He doesn't say, stay away from the Sadducees. He doesn't say, stay away from the rabbis. Instead of giving us one kind of person or a perspective or a worldview to stay away from, Jesus gives us wisdom to discern how to determine who to pay attention to. So let's look at the words of Jesus here in the next 2 slides. He says, be on your guard against false prophets who come to you in what? Sheep's clothing. So they're appearing like a sheep. What is a sheep when we talk about in the world of Jesus and the religious world? What is a sheep? Follower of Jesus, right? Someone that wants good things for you. This person appears like they look like a sheep. Revelation 13 talks about this, right? It says that there's a beast who has the horns of a sheep. It looks like a sheep, but it speaks like a what? Speaks like a dragon. Very good. So Jesus continues, but inwardly they are ravaging wolves, seeking to destroy, abuse, and devour. Let's go to the next slide. And then Jesus gives us the wisdom. He says, you'll recognize them by their fruit. You'll recognize them by their fruit. Can we go to the next slide? We talked about that. Can we go to the next one, please? All right. So I want to share a little story. I don't know if you were at this event. In 2015, there was a general conference in San Antonio, Texas, And right before this big event, I was down with the Southwestern Theology class. We were working with Mark Finley. We were his Bible workers for his evangelistic series that was held in San Antonio. And so we were the ones giving Bible studies. We were visiting people's homes. We were the ones talking with people as guests came in to the evangelistic series. And Mark Finley was training us how to do all of these things. It was a great experience. After that was finished, the North American Division Ministerial Department came to a few of us and asked us if we would like to stay for the General Conference session and run the ministerial booth, because at this big conference there was the exhibit hall, where there's all these different booths that you can come and experience different ministries of the Adventist Church. And so I said yes. And so they put us in a hotel. They gave us some funds for food for that week, and we stayed during GC session. Now, if you're familiar what happened during GC session, there was many considered to be a very important vote, which was over women's ordination, right? And so I was at the ministerial booth at this event. I didn't get to go to any of the sessions, but I got to talk and interact with people as they came through the exhibit booth. Now, there was something interesting that would happen, was that people would have pamphlets and booklets that were written by prominent Adventist pastors and ministry leaders detailing the reason why they believe women should or should not be ordained. And what people were doing is they were coming up to me and many others in the exhibit hall, and they wanted to convince me and many others why women should or they should not be ordained to ministry. And so I got all these different booklets that people were giving me. I was like, yeah, I'll take it. Yeah, I'll take it. I'll take it. And I went home to the hotel room, and I would read through those booklets because I didn't know what to believe. I was in theology school, but I wasn't really sure. This was a relatively new topic for me at the time, and I wanted to have an answer. And I noticed that people would give me booklets from like Doug Batchelor, and they would say, "Don't you know that Doug Batchelor talks about this, and this is his view. It should be your view too." And then someone else would come up with a booklet, and they'll say, "Ty Gibson wrote this. You should believe this too, because Ty Gibson wrote this about women's ordination." And I found that lots of people were loyal to Adventist pastors. They were loyal to brand names who had their own ministries and were thriving within the Adventist church. But what I also discovered is that Doug Batchelor and Ty Gibson, which are on different spectrums of Adventism, use the same Bible verses to prove their point. Now, I don't know about you, but when people are on opposite views of a subject, they usually don't use the same Bible verses to back up their stance. And I thought, there's something fishy here where we're using the same Bible verses to prove different points on the same subject. Some people would even come by, they wanted me to sign their petition. Like, you make sure you're going to vote for, but they weren't very wise because I wasn't a delegate. So that wouldn't matter even though I signed that paper. And I went into a Bible study where I wanted to discover this on my own. I wanted to know, what does God think and have to say about women's ordination in the Bible? And what I was very, I'm not going to tell you what I came up with because that's a polarizing topic. If you want to know, come to potluck, sit at my table, I'll be happy to tell you. But I'm not going to say it from the front. What was very interesting is that no one came through that exhibit hall and said, "Have you read this Bible verse and how it impacts the decision that's going to make at GC session?" Not a single person. No one came and said, "Here is some Ellen White quotations," which is not as good as having a Bible verse, but no one did that either. They didn't say, "Here are some Ellen White quotations that prove that we should or we shouldn't ordain women." It didn't happen. But people over and over again placed a high emphasis on popular names in Adventism. what does that have to say about how we view certain people? Sometimes the name and the person, we like that speaker. We like that person from any part of Adventist ministries. And sometimes we put that name above the things that they might say. And this is a real big problem. It's not just an Adventist problem. It's a worldwide problem. What Jesus is trying to get at is that we need to go above the name of people. Just because Pastor Dom says something doesn't mean it's what I should live my life by. Now, one of the things that we often tie into what Jesus' recommendation was is you will know them by their fruit, right? Now, what does Jesus mean by this? What do we mean by this when we say, I know them by their fruit? Now, Jesus talks about how, in chapter 7, how there are trees that will produce similar fruit, right? So an apple tree will produce apples, not a pineapple, and a peach tree isn't going to produce a plum. They're going to produce similar fruit. Usually, we think if someone has any fruit at all, that's what Jesus means. If they have lots and lots of baptisms, then that is a good person I should follow because they produce fruit. But I would like to challenge that. No, don't just look at the number of fruit that they produce. Consider the quality of their fruit. Can we skip a few slides here, about 2 or 3 slides? Go to the next one. Go to the next one. I like pineapples. Here it is. Fast food restaurants prioritize what? Efficiency or speed over quality. I want you to think about that for a moment. Fast food restaurants prioritize efficiency or speed over quality. There are many ministries that are producing lots of fruit, but are producing poor quality Christians. Either that focus on things that are outward, or they focus on, let's just boil this down here a moment. There are very few who are producing disciples. And our goal is not to make more Christians, not to make more Seventh-day Adventists who believe the 28 fundamental beliefs, but more importantly than either of those, we want to produce more disciples who go and make more disciples. We want to do the mission of Jesus, which is what we've been studying these last 3 weeks. Look at the actual teachings of Jesus and live out those teachings around us. And so what Jesus emphasizes is to pay attention to the quality of the fruit, not just how many. There are lots of evangelists and evangelistic campaigns where there's like that one that happened in, what was it? Was it Guatemala that had like 2,000, 3,000 baptisms? And I always question those because what's going to happen with those 2,000, 3,000 people? Most places don't have the capacity to mentor and develop 2,000, 3,000 people. One of the things that we often have to consider, especially here with the teachings of Jesus, is what is happening to the quality of those people. Now, I really don't like talking negatively about other groups of people, so I'm going to do my best not to do that to this morning as well. There are some, I'm not going to mention any individuals, there are some groups that we have recently seen lots of controversy with some of their speakers. And so I think a lot of those things are important for us to take notice of when we see trends with the product or the end result, the disciples that are being baptized and being brought into the church. These things are important to take notice of. Jesus, if you remember Jesus in his conversation with the Pharisees, there's a chapter in Matthew, where Jesus spends some time to bring about the woes of the Pharisees. Do you remember that? And he talks about all the things that they do poorly and how they'll go proselytize, which means to go and baptize or bring others into your faith, into another country. And he says, when they come back, they are greater devils than you are. He talks about how the Pharisees make it difficult for people to get into heaven because of all the standards that they place on these new converts. And this is important to think about and realize. When we're trying to follow a person or follow a name or follow someone who's teaching something, it's Jesus' advice is not whether they're conservative or liberal, or whether they go to a church that has potluck or go and the potluck is vegan, or go to a church that there's beef and meat in there and cheese in there as well. That's not the qualifying mark that Jesus gives. The qualifier that Jesus gives is look at their fruits, whether are they producing the same thing in themselves and to other people, and what is also the quality of their fruit as well. Okay, let's go into the next one because I really want to get to the next thing here. Let's skip that one for a moment. Let's go to the will of the Father. In Matthew 7, Jesus ends this section talking about the will of the Father. Next slide, please. And he says, on that day, many will come to me and say, Lord, Lord, didn't we prophesy in your name, drive out demons in your name, and do many miracles in your name? These are people of good hearts and good focus, and they believe that they're doing things in the name of God. And there's a really great story in the book of Acts about someone who embodies what Jesus is talking about here. You might remember there's this man named Saul, and he's zealous for God. Not certainly for Jesus, but he's zealous for God. And he believes the things that he is doing is on par with the mission of the Almighty. So much so that Saul goes to the Pharisees and he goes to the temple office to retrieve a letter giving him permission to expand his territory to go into Damascus. And it's on the road to Damascus that Saul encounters something he would never, ever expect to encounter. He is so focused on his mission, so focused on his goal, there's no way that he would think that he would encounter this. And he meets Jesus on the road. And it's an encounter with Jesus that shifts his perspective so much so that instead of wanting to round up all these Christians, which he believed were heretics, bringing in falsehood, they were false teachers led by the greatest false teacher, Jesus, and seeking to destroy Judaism from within. Have you heard something like that about other people? These are the heretics. Be careful of those people, right? If you were Saul, sometimes it's hard for us to imagine what Saul is going through on the road to Damascus because we're Christians and we say, Saul, you're wrong. You should be on their side. I want you to imagine you're on a mission trip to bring the good news of Jesus. And on your way on your journey on the mission trip, you're in Africa, you're on the road, and you have a caravan of people, you're driving down the road, and suddenly the god Vishnu appears and says, why are you persecuting me? You know Vishnu, right? It's the god in India. Which one? The one with many arms. That's what Elder Mike says. That one appears and says, this is what he's experiencing. It's not just anyone that's appearing. It's the one that he's going against says, you got it all wrong. And Saul turns from this persecutor of the Christians into wanting to meet them in Jerusalem. And you can imagine why they would be very nervous about Saul meeting us in Jerusalem after he's been rounding us up and putting us in prison. This only happens, though, because Saul has an experience of Jesus. Now, we might not be the person here that thinks they're doing God's will. In reality, we're doing something very, very far from it. Maybe you know someone that is close to your heart and you love them and they think they're doing something great for God, but in reality, they're causing division and destruction. How do we reach a person like that? Jesus lets us know. It's through an experience with him. Go to the next slide, David, please. And Jesus continues, and he says, "Then I will announce to them, I never knew you. Depart from me, you law breakers." The emphasis here is not that they're lawbreakers. The emphasis here is what? The relationship. They were doing things apart from relationship. When we do mission apart from relationship, we get lost. This is what Saul was doing. He was doing the will of God apart from relationship. He thought that it was God's will to get rid of the heretics, to get rid of the heresy, to get rid of this false teacher, Jesus, that's causing division among Israel. But in reality, God was in alignment with the heretic. This is a strange thing to say. God was in alignment with who Saul thought was the enemy. He was actually moving against God. How many of you are familiar with your Adventist history and you know a little bit about the 1888 Bible conferences? Okay, we got a few. Okay, I think this is such a pivotal moment in Adventist history that we're constantly going back to that story. So if you remember what was happening in 1888, we had Bible conferences that would meet every few years. And in 1888, there was a big Bible conference going over the law of God, especially as it's described in the book of Galatians. And there were these two different camps. On one side, you had G.I. Butler, who was the president of the Adventist Church. It's a big name. And you also had Uriah Smith. Now, Uriah Smith was very, very important. He was the one who wrote the book on Bible prophecy from the Adventist perspective. He was the one that wrote the book Daniel and Revelation. He was the editor of the Adventist Review. Who's going to stand against the editor of the Adventist Review and Herald, the one who wrote the book on Adventist Bible prophecy, and the conference president? These two young kids from the best state, California, and they were making statements against what Uriah Smith and G.I. Butler were saying about the law of God. In comes Ellen White, who is the prophet of God, going to stand in the midst of all of this. Now, if you remember the arguments that were going on, Uriah Smith and G.I. Butler were stating that it was the ceremonial laws that was nailed to the cross. And we need to focus on being a law-keeping people. And here come E.J. Wagner and A.T. Jones. They are just kids. They're younger than myself. And they come in saying we need to place an emphasis on grace and the cross. That should be the focus of Adventism. Ellen White comes in and she says, these boys have got it right. It causes such a rift in the Adventist church that the leaders decide to send her on a missionary trip to Australia. Do you know what she does while she's in Australia? She begins to write. Do you know what books she writes in Australia? We have the most gospel-centered books that come out of the Adventist church when she is on this missionary. Really, it's an exile, if we're being truthful about it. They didn't know what to deal with her because she was confronting brands. She was confronting names. And we thought, if that person says it, then I'm going to believe it. Instead of searching for the scriptures ourselves, even our leaders. It's okay if our leaders are wrong. It's our job to navigate that together. Even the leaders were siding with the brand names over those young boys from California. And when the prophet spoke, they went with the brand names. And it's there that she writes Steps to Christ. It's there that she writes Desire of Ages. It's there that she writes all of these books that have a gospel, Jesus-centered focus. Friends, Jesus' recommendation, as he gets to almost the close of the Sermon on the Mount, is to have a discerning heart, to look at the product, the quality of someone's ministry. Now, it's not just brand names, it's not just pastors, but we also are called to look at what is around us as well. Now, there's something interesting that happens in Western American theology, and that is that we often perceive that salvation is personal. Salvation is my heart being saved. But in the Bible, salvation is not personal. It is based on community. How do I know that I'm saved? By how my salvation impacts others. Now, Jay and Danny, can I use you as a story this morning? So, when Jay and Danny got baptized, something amazing happened that I had never ever experienced before. And that is, they got baptized here in the morning. And after church, after potluck, I did the thing that I usually do, and we had potluck, and we went over to my house, and I got ready for my nap for that afternoon, as I usually do. And do you know where Jay and Danny went that afternoon? They went downtown. And there was this a convention of some sort of all these different churches meeting, and they were sharing what their church was all about, what was happening at their church, and they wanted any representative from any church to speak and to share what their church is all about and what they're doing. Do you know how many Adventists, Seventh-day Adventists, were at that in downtowns on the square down there? We had 2. They had just got baptized, guys, and they stood in front of the whole, I don't know how many people were there, and they were asked to share about their church after getting baptized an hour before. That's amazing to me. That's amazing. This is the type of Christians we want to produce. People who are excited to share about their faith. People who move when God says move. How easy would it have been to one day and make that announcement like, let's go in the car. I don't want to be in front of everyone. That would have been really easy, right? But instead, they said, they chose to go up and share. That is an amazing thing. And one of the things that we want to do is not just be able to recognize true prophets and true teachers by their fruit. We also want to be the results of being a great fruit of God, the great product of God. That when people say, wow, look at Ken and Carol, whoa, look at John, that they can say, why are you this way? And you can point to, not to me, but you can point to the product of your church, and you can say, this is because of what I've been learning. This is what God has been sharing with me. God is doing an amazing thing in my life. The greatest witnessing isn't from preaching. It's not from evangelists. It's from you. Because you can do things that an evangelist could never do. When an evangelist comes to Bartlesville, they might preach in this church, but they won't go into town square. They won't go into Walmart. They won't go into gas stations and doctors' offices. They won't go to the places that you and I frequent every single week. If you want to bring change and revival to your city and your community, it's not going to be because of a great special music, a great singer, or a great speaker. It's because you had taken the gospel and made it a part of your life. And that when you are in everyday conversations with people, you can do something beautiful, which is change lives by bringing hope. We have people in our church that have survived tremendous difficulties. And because they have the ability and the opportunity to share with others how God has moved and done miracles in your life and the life of your church. Father in heaven, we are so grateful for you. We're grateful for your Son, Jesus, who provided us with discernment as he closes his Sermon on the Mount of how to discern good quality fruit. Father, we pray that the Seventh-day Adventist Church, especially here in Bartlesville, Oklahoma, can be good quality fruit. That when people bite into us, when people experience our church and the people that make up the church, that they will say, I want some more of that. I've tasted and saw that the Seventh-day Adventist Church's experience, that their presence here in Oklahoma is good, and I want some more. And Father, we pray that we will be good witnesses to our community so that people can be drawn to you. You've told us that when you are lifted up, you will draw all men to yourself. And so, Father, help us in all of our conversations, all of our dealings with people, to lift you up. In Jesus' name, amen.